would happen. Well, good morning, church. If you have your Bibles, if you'd open to John chapter 12. John chapter 12. If you had all the money in the world, it wasn't a problem, and it was 4 days away from Valentine's Day, let's say, and you could buy your spouse the gift of a lifetime, what would you spend it on? If you could be absolutely extravagant. My parents were born in 1931 and 1932, so they grew up in the shadow of the Depression. So we were taught to be very, very frugal. We never went out of a room if the light was on without switching it off. We had curtains drawn to keep heat in and or heat out, and vice versa, because we didn't have central heating, and so everything was run really carefully. There was no 2 birthday presents. There was a birthday present, and so on. It was just a very different life, and so many of us growing up in the shadow of that era grew up very frugally, maybe a little bit minimalistically. And we have lost the idea of what it means to be absolutely, crazily extravagant. And I would like to challenge you to do that today. Just to give you a shopping list of where you can begin with a few gifts you can think about. If you had to take that one, and we're going clockwise, the one right above me, right over there, it's sort of like a round shape. If you look carefully, you will see that that is New York City, and you might get it from the $1 million bottle, which is called DKNY. DK New York Golden Delicious. Or instead of Golden Delicious, you can say the Golden Apple, right? So it's a little bit of a play there on these words. And that would set you off $1 million. The top of the lid is made up of diamonds, sapphires, just the most precious stones you could imagine. Highlights the lights that come off the top of that skyline, New York skyline. But you can go down now, following clockwise to the top right-hand corner one, and you can find one for $12 an ounce. If you're not interested in the ounce of the bottle, but you're interested in something that's very valuable inside the bottle. And then you can drop down to the bottom right-hand corner, and you can see the one that costs $6,800 an ounce. And then you can end up with this one right above my head here, Chanel number 5, which is $4,200 an ounce. So the average of these top very, very expensive perfumes comes to $1,200 an ounce. So that's extravagant, right? Would you believe that we have something just as extravagant in the Word of God? What is the most precious liquid in the Bible? I'll give you a hint. We just talked about it. Thanks, Steve. It's the blood of Christ. How much is 1 ounce of the blood of Christ worth? How much is the blood of the Creator of everything worth? And how important is it for us to understand that? And once we understand that, and once we understand how ridiculously, lavishly God has loved us, how we can in turn sit back and do something that is also lavish. And so we're looking at radical WMD. Billy asked, should he say WMD? I said, probably not. Just say worship, and we'll pick it up from there. How can we be radical in our worship? How can we be radical in our ministry? And how can we be radical in the offerings, in the money that we give? How can we be radical in what we return to God? And so what we do is then just look at those first 8 verses. You can look up to verse 11, if you want to see the complete context. In fact, you can pick it up from chapter 11, verse 53, and you can see that because Jesus resurrected Lazarus from the dead, the Pharisees were trying to kill him. Now, who would do that? I mean, if we had somebody in our lifetime that could raise people from the dead, what type of irresponsible people would we be to try to kill that one person that can do that? Right? But you can end it up and look at verses 9, 10, and 11, and you can see that because he raised Lazarus from the dead, and because people would come to Bethany to see Lazarus, the Pharisees just said, well, let's kill him also. In fact, the word also is used there in connection with killing Lazarus. So that's the immediate context, and if I broaden it just a little bit, we can go to chapter 11, verse 1, and we can see Lazarus has died. Jesus has just heard his best friend, is whatever we say initials for what my best friend is, has died. So I'm going to stay 4 days. And we went through that. We scratched our head. How can he do that? We saw Martha coming into him first, and Martha saying, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Mary falls at the feet of Jesus, says the same thing. If you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And then you can see that it picks up there with chapter 12, verse 1, with this meal in honor of Jesus, because of what he did, because of the way he raised Lazarus from the dead. But more than just that, and we'll see that in a little bit. We can go on to chapter 13, and we can see the context is Jesus showing us at the final supper, the last supper that he would have, and the institution of the Lord's Supper as we have it, the last Passover meal, that he will get down first off and wash people's feet. And he'll take on the role of a servant. And so all of these things that we see here with Mary and Lazarus happens in the context of all of these things. And again, our bigger context, as Tom wrote in his article, is to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus during this year. 6 days before the Passover, John chapter 1 through John chapter 11 takes the first 3 years of Jesus' life. John chapter 12 through to John chapter 21, the end of John, takes the last week of Jesus' life. And so you can see where the emphasis is going to be. So 6 days basically before he's going to be killed. It's coming right here towards the end of his life. Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Today, Bethany is still known to many as the city of Lazarus. It's very interesting. People want to know about this Lazarus. If Lazarus was alive today and he'd just been resurrected from the dead, do you think anybody would want to interview him? Do you think he would be on the late show tours, speaking tours? What questions would they ask him? Just let your imaginations go. What questions would you ask Lazarus? Did you see any angels? What is heaven like? Oh, can you see hell from heaven? I have a few questions I want to ask, So these are the things that people might have been asking Lazarus. But in all recorded text, Lazarus never says one word. The reason is he is a living, walking witness. Just like you and I, without saying one word, can be a witness to Jesus by our lives. We have some of the most generous people in the world sitting in this building. I've personally been the recipient on other organizations that I'm part of extreme generosity from members of this congregation. Some even in this congregation who are not here right now are very generous. The one time that you're not going to be too generous is when you're going to retire, right? You're going to have to pinch your pennies. I know of one person in the retirement years that over the last year has given $100,000 to this congregation. So there are all these things in my mind that lets me know there are people in this congregation that absolutely get it. And here's another thing I've learned with experience. Generous people never complain about the way elders use the money of the Lord's church. I've never seen that. So just something to think about. If I ever hear you complaining about something the elders are doing, in the back of my head I'm thinking, Because you see, I don't know what people give. I just know by knowing this congregation that this is an extremely generous congregation. Jesus, you and your family can testify to the generosity of these brethren. And any of you ever come to a point where you are in need of something, you will find out that this congregation is extremely generous. And so we look here 6 days before Passover. Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner to him, that is to Jesus, there. So where is that dinner? I know it's in Bethany. Excuse me just for a second. These things that I put over my ears, it gets me to have to readjust this when I'm live. All right, so what we have here is there is something else that's going to happen in Luke chapter 7, where another woman is going to anoint Jesus' feet with oil, with ointment. And many people have connected these two, but I don't think it's so, because that is in Luke chapter 7. It's in the beginning stages of the ministry of Jesus, where all of these others in Mark and John and in Matthew recorded towards the end of Jesus' life, in the last week of Jesus' life. And so I believe this was in the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, not in Simon the leper's house, or ex-leper, as would happen in Luke chapter 7. And so they gave him a dinner, and what is happening? Where do you expect to find Martha? Where do you expect to find Mary? Where do you expect to find Lazarus? So Lazarus has found the lazy boy. In those days, it was reclining, it was laying down. It was not in a seated position, but you lay down in a sort of a U-shape table, and the food is served in that area. And so they are laying in that U-shaped area. Where would you expect to find Mary? Probably at the feet of Jesus. Where would you expect to find Martha? Probably in the kitchen, right? So Martha is serving. But where we saw her last time when she was serving, she was distracted by many things. And Jesus said, what Mary has chosen will not be taken from her. What had Mary chosen, and where was Mary? You remember? Mary was where, church? Thank you. At Jesus' feet. At Jesus' feet. And so Lazarus is reclining with him at the table. Mary, therefore, took a pound of expensive ointment made of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. A few things happening right there. This pure nard comes from the Himalayan mountains via India. You could maybe say via China as well. But probably via India, it's incredibly, incredibly expensive. It would be the equivalent of $1,200 an ounce. Judas is going to tell us that this is a year's wage. So all of you, just figure out how much do you make in a year. What is your salary in a year? I'll let it out, and I'll show you the statistics later on, just before we end the service, that the average American, the individual American, earns $48,000 in 2018. Some of you might say, boy, that's really a lot. Others will say, that's pretty low. So the average, right? The mean household will be more like $64,000, $65,000 for a household. So this, you can imagine, if this is minimum wage, the cheapest we can think would be $15,000. But it's probably more like $50,000. How many of you would go out, buy $50,000 worth of the most expensive perfume, and pour it out on your spouse's feet? You know, and you've got to understand. So some of the wives are looking at the husbands like, yeah, that's a good idea. The feet in those days was the most disgusting part of your body, because people walked in a lot of dust, and the shoes were open sandals and things like that. It's so bad that you couldn't even ask your lowest slave to wash your feet without legal ramifications. So if they did do it, nobody better ever find out about it. So this is what you have. You have, what would you call that? Is it okay if I call it extravagant love? You know, love that's so obvious it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing. And then there's something that your wife your husband and your children are the only people who ever see this, is when a woman lets her hair down. Nobody else would see that. But she does that. She does that. It's like you are the bride and your bridegroom is here and you want to show him how much you love him. Worship takes place in the heart, and we'll see that just now. It's something that changes. Also, worship takes place in an arena of rest. God is always at rest. He's always seated. Christ is called our Sabbath rest. And we're so busy that we don't rest. We don't breathe in, breathe out, relax, and get down at the feet of Jesus and rest and meditate and realign, refocus ourselves. This is the opportunity. Every single day I have the opportunity to go to a religious chiropractor. I have the opportunity to go to the feet of Jesus. I have the opportunity to let Him fill me up so much that I start to permeate Him. But I have to go to His feet every single Lord's Day, and then He needs to permeate out. I remember there were a few years that I could do that in a concentrated form. And Carter, you are experiencing that right now. You don't just do the early morning Bible reading. All day you're studying the Word of God. You're interacting in a way that shows who you are, the type of person that you want to become. And it's like you get filled so much that Jesus just starts to spill out of you. You are the light of the earth, of the world. You're the salt of the earth. This is what we can do every single time we open the Word of God. And that is where we find Mary, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped His feet, not with a towel, but with her hair. And the people would have looked at that. You know, when it happened, and you can see the parallel scriptures over here, you'll see that Luke chapter 7 is the one that's out, because it's not Luke chapter 7. But if we go to that Luke chapter 7 one, we'll see that Simon, the leper, is standing there looking at this happening, and this lady of the night, this sinful lady who would use perfume to attract her clients, is taking this perfume and throwing it on the feet of Jesus. She was resigning her previous lifestyle. She's changing, and Simon's saying to himself, if he knew who this woman is, what type of a woman this is, he would not have her doing that. And Jesus says, Simon, when I was here in your house, you never gave me anything to wash my feet. You never gave me a blessing. You never anointed my head. You never gave me a kiss, and things like that. And three things he mentions. And from the moment I've come here, this woman has not ceased to wash my feet with her tears and to dry my feet with her hair, and to anoint my feet. You didn't anoint my head. These were traditional things you would do. And so there's a lot going on here. But I really love this last phrase here. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. When we worship God like we ought to worship God, this house is filled with the fragrance of God. Extravagant, isn't it? And we'll break it up in a little while, but I don't want to miss some of the details as we go through here. And then it says, but Judas, right? Always has to have somebody that's going to spoil the scene. And I'm going to keep talking like that, and you're going to get angry with Judas, and you're going to miss out two very important things. Number one, you could be Judas. You could be Judas. When I was talking about the extravagant gift of someone and of different people, did you have any judgment in your mind against them? I hope not. I believe this is a generous congregation. I'll give you one more opportunity to judge someone. And I will put one of our elders on the spot, and I'll say, Billy, we're going to judge you right now. A few months ago, I heard of Billy being very extravagant in some of the things that he's been doing around here. The parking lot that's growing there is probably completely just his doing. And he keeps getting people calling him, and they keep on expanding that. But about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, one of them said that we needed some gravel, and Billy said, you just tell us how much it's going to cost, and we'll take care of it. Right, Billy? And the guy said, no, you don't get it. This is really helping us, so we'll provide that. And then about a week ago, again, somebody said, something's falling down over here. We're going to bring in some heavy equipment to fix it. And Billy said, you just tell us how much it costs, and we'll take care of it. And he said to Billy, no, you don't get it. We're saving, I don't know how much, but they're saving a packet of money by putting this, they're dumping their waste over here, basically. And now, if Judas was there, Billy, he would have said to you, you missed that, Billy. Didn't you pick up that we could be making thousands of dollars by charging people? We could have a fellowship building built here. See, that's what is happening in Judas's mind. But it will never happen in the mind of a generous person. A business degree does not belong in your work in church. That's great. It'll help you bring in the bacon. But here in the Lord's church, the Lord's rules apply, and the Lord's rules are generous, and it's to see with the eyes of Jesus, which means you have to sit at the feet of Jesus. You won't see it unless you're sitting at the feet of Jesus. In fact, you might think, and I can't call Billy an idiot or a fool because the Bible says I may not, but you might think something like that. And God forbid that anyone ever does that type of thing, because this is what Judas is doing, and I think we are responsible for that. I think we sometimes do that. And we need to not look at anybody else but ourselves. The other thing that you might not figure out here is what the rest of it. It was he who was about to betray him, it says, verse 5, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii, which is a year's wage, and given to the poor? Now, if you have an NIV, it wouldn't say 300 denarii like what the Greek text does. It would say a year's wage, because the NIV thinks you won't be able to calculate what the 300 denarii means. But it is a year's wage, and thankfully, thanks to Judas's stinginess, we get to know just how extravagant this gift is. Otherwise, we would never have known. But we see another thing. This is happening in Bethany. Now, Bethany comes from two words, Beth and Anna. Beth means house, which is easy to understand. It always just means that. But Anna could mean a few things. Anna could mean to sing. Anna could also mean to be in distress. And so this could be called the house of the distressed, the house of people who are struggling, the house of people who are poor. It also means the house of people who communicate through singing. So this all is wonderful if you look at the language a little bit to see what Mary is doing here. But these people, these 12 apostles plus Jesus, were used to doing something which is interesting if you read between the lines and if you don't see the negativity. They were used to giving to the poor. That's a good thing, right? We ought not to stop doing that. But I can imagine typing up the minutes for the elders, deacon, ministry leader meeting, and I can imagine us having a gift given to us and somebody saying something like that. I can imagine it. So don't be too hard on Judas. Catch yourself. Catch yourself. We don't want to go there. We want to stay at the feet of Jesus. And he said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, having charge of the money bag. He used to help himself to what was put into it. So I've got a little bit of a Greek study there, Dimitri. You can see those two words there, a glossolalia and also a cosmos. The word cosmos means world. Glossolalia means tongue. So that word there, glossolalia and cosmos, which is the money bag, actually means the language of the world. So how does that word, that is kind of interesting. How did that word evolve to becoming a money bag? Well, the first purse that they had was for a flute. You would take the little reed of a flute and you would put it in a purse, and then that later on became a bigger thing because people said, you know what, I could use this flute bag to put coins in. And it eventually became known as the money bag. But what is interesting here is the word thief is klepto, or kleptomaniac in English is what we get there. And that means somebody who lifts money out of the purse. So analyze this quickly. Judas saw a potential of a year's worth of money coming into the purse which he stole from. So he's not happy over here. So this is not a very good motive. And again, we need to look into our own lives. Jesus said, leave her alone. And Mark is more clear on this, that the reason for this, let me just take you back a second there. Look at verse 3, Mary therefore. Now Mark will tell you what the therefore is for. It's for the burial of Jesus. Here in Luke, you have to go all the way here to see what's actually happening, what the therefore or why Mary was doing this. Jesus said, leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. Jesus is about to be buried less than a week from this day. And his feet, you could imagine, would still have that ointment in it. And by the way, Mary's hair would also be smelling really good. When you are extravagant with God, part of that blessing is going to stay on you. Leave her alone so that this may be done for my body. Prepare my body for burial. For the poor you'll always have with me, but you do not always have me. And so that's where we have to look at the text and some lessons we can get out of it. So very briefly, I'm going to pull 3 things. What does radical worship look like? What does radical ministry look like? And what does radical, and I say dollars here just to get WMD so you can remember it. What does radical offering look like? First off, when you come to radical worship, you'll notice her position. Where do you find her? You find her at the feet of Jesus. When you come into worship with God and you say, what is worship really like? I gave you a few hints. It's restful, it's peaceful, but it's at the feet of Jesus. And when I say at the feet of Jesus, I mean you learn from Jesus. You don't let anything of the Word of God go by. You pick up every little scrap that will fall. Secondly, you'll see her gift. Her gift is incredibly extravagant. When we come to Jesus, what is the gift that we present to Jesus? Worship is a gift. So if you leave here saying, worship felt a little bit flat today, right? Or you say, I didn't feel blessed by worship today. Or I didn't, and if we had all kinds of instrumental music here and solo singers and stuff or choirs, you would say, I didn't feel uplifted today, which is just code for I didn't feel entertained today. So just think about that for a second. The fact that you are in a place with a very simple worship format actually makes it easier for you to realize you're not here for yourself, you're here for God. You are here to worship God. Trust me, I've worshiped in both ways. It's a lot easier to know what worship really is in a church like what we are in today. Also, her towel. She's using her hair. That is shameful. Worship sometimes will do things that other people around you won't understand. So what would that mean for you? How can you worship God in a better way? I looked at one of the things that was the most extravagant religious thing ever done, and I came across this thing. This building cost $100 billion. And in case you're wondering, that is the most expensive building in the world. But I don't think that's what God meant with worship. So what I have to do is I have to go back to the feet of Jesus and I have to look at what does he say worship is. He said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. And then there's a whole bunch of other statements. What does that look like? Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 saying to not be conformed to the world, but verse 1 says we need to take our bodies and we need to see our bodies as a living sacrifice, which is our spiritual act of worship, and we need to lay it down on the altar. And I believe, because of the top verse, that this needs to be done every single day. I believe that our whole being, is the element of worship. I think the most extravagant gift God gave us was His Son. And I believe the most extravagant gift we give God is ourselves. I think that's what it is. Secondly, radical ministry. What does radical ministry look like? To make it easier for you, we're just going to use Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. Lazarus is the witness. Mary is the worshiper. And Martha is the servant. So in your serving, in your ministry, and in your worship, how can you be extravagant? Think about that. Every one of us comes to the Lord in different areas, in different ways. Sometimes we can come to the Lord in all three of those ways. But what is the most radical way that we can do that? When looking at some of the most expensive salaries that you can earn, those are the top few. I included number 4, since you only have to have a master's degree to earn $167,000 a year. But I think that would probably be a very, very difficult degree to get, to be a nurse, and it might even be a postdoctorate degree for all I know. Those are incredibly high-paying jobs. But what Jesus wants of us is ourselves. He wants us to be the thing that we use to minister to Him. And so here we go, sitting again at the feet of Jesus. Here is how Paul the apostle did it. He was constantly beaten, constantly being put down. But what did he do? He didn't shrink back. I like verse 20 there. He did not shrink back from declaring to you anything that was profitable and teaching you in public and from house to house. And he testified to everybody. So why do you do that? In doing that, he said, I didn't count my life as valuable. I didn't count my life as precious. For him to live is Christ. To die is gain. So it really didn't matter whether he lived or died, according to Philippians chapter 1, 21 through 23. But this is what he said. In ministry, I testified to the gospel of the grace of God. And I didn't hold back from anybody. I didn't shrink back from anybody. Why? So that he can say this in verse 27. I did not shrink back from declaring the whole counsel of God. And so I am not guilty of anybody's blood. I believe that is the ministry. I believe that's what we should be able to do. I believe we all need to come to a point where we don't count our lives as valuable unless it's in the service of God. So there are a lot of different careers that you could choose. But when you choose to become an elder or a deacon or a servant of Christ, or in Carter's case, a preacher of the gospel or a missionary, you are choosing to set aside your own life for God. And I believe we as Christians get that, and I think that is why we are such a radical and such a different congregation from so many others you would see. So we've seen WMD, we've seen radical worship, radical ministry. How about radical giving? And again, this is between you and the Lord, but what Mary did was what? Absolutely extravagant. Absolutely extravagant. How do we do that? How can we ever measure up to that type of giving? What is the most extravagant people in our world? Well, I'll talk to you about that in just a second. How about the proportionality of a gift? How much did Mary give? I believe she took the jar. I believe it might have been her assets for a job that she was doing. It could have been something she was keeping for the day she gets married. I'm not sure why she had such it could be that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were very well off. It could be. But I'm pretty sure she took all that she had when it came to that perfume and dumped all of it on Jesus' feet. And what was the purpose? What is the purpose of our gift? To be a sacrifice to Jesus, to prepare Jesus for burial, but in our case, to live the burial, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In other words, it is the most selfless act anybody could ever do. So the world, if you look at the top richest people in the world, and you look at what they give, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? Warren Buffett is going to give $37 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation upon his death. It's written in his testament. So when he dies, that's what's going to happen. We may say, whoa, what an incredible gift. I can never do that, right? Absolutely you can. Because we're going to sit at the feet of Jesus. And we're going to see something just in a second. I've got Mark chapter 12, verse 41 in the middle there. You can pick it up and see where I'm going. But this is what, according to the U.S. Census and according to Social Security Administration, this is what Americans earned in 2018. Just for you to see how extravagant this gift of Mary's was. You can also see, if you talk to somebody who says, I'm very poor, I don't have a lot of money. I remember there was a time I was in college and I had very, very little money. But today, I can probably ask most students, what is the cost of that cell phone that you have in your pocket? And the average cell phone right now goes for $528,000. And several people are probably saying to me right now, so of the seniors, I got the flip phone, right? So you don't count here. 37% of people attending church give nothing. The average amount that people give is 2.5%. And during the Great Depression was 3.3. And 80% of people who give to churches have 0% debt. Isn't that interesting? So here's a message not for us, because I've got these numbers for Summit here, because if you divide that, and Brad, I think you could in your head probably tell us how many people put money in the plate and what the average is, and you can figure it out. And you're probably doing it right now, and you'll notice that we give far, far more than the average people that I've got up there. We're an extravagantly generous congregation. But the reason I say that is because things seem to go wrong when we stop being generous towards God. And when we start being generous towards God, things seem to go right. And I'm not preaching prosperity gospel because of this. Mary didn't give this gift to Jesus because of what she could get. You get that? Mary gave it to Jesus because of what she'd received. She'd just received her dead brother back to life. She was incredibly grateful. She was trying to give him the most extravagant gift that she could. We don't give money in the plate or to Jesus because we want to get money back. We give because we know what Jesus gave to us. We sit here and we don't worship like little mice. We worship extravagantly every single moment of our lives because of what He did. We don't minister because of what He did, because of what we're going to get, but we choose to serve Him because of what He did for us. And finally, we don't give because of what He's given us. We give because what He's already received, not because of what we will receive. Yes, it's true. If you sow, you will reap. That's the truest statement you could ever come to. But I know of people who've been absolutely, completely generous towards God and who have lived a very hard and difficult life. So there's no guarantee or connection between that. It's just a general principle. But I would love to know what our congregation would be like if we did what this lady did. If we were generous like this. I want you to notice that Jesus sat down opposite the treasury. The little, whatever they had in the treasury was probably in the wall, some place where you could throw money in and would go into a secure room. And rich people came by and they were giving lavishly. And this poor widow came and she gave 2 pennies, or 2 little coins that equaled a penny. It's hardly anything. And Jesus calls the disciples together and He says this, truly, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all of those contributing to the offering box. Why? For they contributed out of their overflow, their abundance, but she out of her poverty, and listen carefully now, has put in everything she had. And in case you didn't understand, everything she had to live on. So if all I have in the world is 2 little coins that make a penny, I can still be extravagant to God. I don't know what is going to turn us from being extravagant in every area of our life, but I really would challenge you to do that. What is it going to sound like? I wonder when a prayer is led, whether everybody would be quiet or sleeping or they would pray with. I wonder when the singing is being led, whether there would be people standing up and not singing at all, or whether there would be people who can't sing would at least be mouthing the words from their heart. And those who can, make a joyful, what does it say, Billy? Noise, right? Even if they couldn't sing, even some noise to God, it is the most beautiful thing. And I hope, church, if we have people who are extravagant in their display in worship, and it's embarrassing to some of us, I hope we wouldn't be Judas and sit back and judge it. Let us be the congregation. Let us be a people who worship from the heart, driven from that. If you're subject to the gospel invitation today, if you would like to start your life by dying with Jesus, being buried with Jesus, and resurrecting to walk a new life, or if you need the praise of the church, please do so right now by coming forward as together we stand and sing.